recording. If you missed last week, the recording of last week is posted to the Digital Lounge website. The recording did not get sound, probably because I left it on mute. So it will go through at least the slides and the sample data, so you'll be able to see it. But unfortunately, it might be a little confusing if you missed last week, if you're trying to look at the soundless recording. I think I have sound on right now, so hopefully this week we'll have sound recorded. Okay, but
sorry, where does the recording, where can we access it?
Oh, where you said? I think it is the it's this website, annenbergdl.org, and they post tutorials on here. And I believe these are last year's. I did a Python and Excel sequence. Those are here. I think the Excel one should be on here somewhere. I believe it's somewhere in this site, right section. Yeah, that should be where you can find those. Cool. Okay. So we are going to do a quick review of last week. I know that last week formulas were a little bit new for some of us, and we maybe have a few folks who weren't here last week. So we'll kind of get a little bit of a refresher. Just as a reminder, this is going to be a pretty hands-on workshop like last week. So I'll talk for a little bit. I'll explain some concepts, but you should definitely be ready to get some get a copy of Excel open on your computer and get going with some data. All right, so last week we kind of did an introduction to formulas. What we're going to do today is a deeper dive into all of the different types of things you can accomplish with formulas. In particular, we're going to look at two formulas that are very commonly used called VLOOKUP and XLOOKUP. They can be a little confusing when you get started, but once you know how to use them, which doesn't take a super long time to wrap your head around, they're extremely powerful tools. I use them all the time in my day-to-day work, and I suspect you all will too once you know what they are. We're also going to work on writing nested formulas. So we started to touch on this a little bit at the end of last session. So this is combining multiple formulas together to kind of accomplish a more complex goal. And then we're going to also sort of revisit cumulative formulas for functions or cumulative functions for formulas as well. Okay. All right. So we're going to just do kind of a quick review of formula basics. As I said, we're going to really get into XLOOKUP and VLOOKUP. That's going to be the meat of our session today. I'm also going to talk briefly about using AI as a tool for helping you figure out Excel. I know many of you have probably played with ChatGPT or Claude or any of these kind of similar AI tools. So we're going to talk a little bit about that and how that overlaps with this workshop. Okay, so just a quick refresher on formulas that we talked about last week. Any formula is going to start with your equal sign. That's how Excel is going to know that it's a formula. Every formula is going to have some sort of name, some sort of function name. You can go through Formula Builder in the sidebar of your Excel, depending on if you're on Mac or PC. It might show up in a different spot, but somewhere in Excel is this list of all the formulas. So you can kind of scroll through or search if you know what you're looking for. And anytime you do that, or even as you start to type, you'll get a little pop-up and it'll explain to you the syntax. Syntax just means what needs to go into your formula to get the result, the output that you want. So this is a very simple formula that we talked about last time. This just takes a piece of text in quotes, and it's going to tell you how many characters long that text is. Okay. All right, so this is kind of the piece we worked up to last time. We didn't quite get to this exercise, but this is the type of exercise that you can do with the formulas that we talked about last time. So what we worked up to was use formulas to write all in a single column, create a bunch of URLs. So you can imagine last week we were working with Netflix data, right? We had a column that was all of our show and movie titles. The sort of prompt that we ended on was, okay, let's imagine that our assignment, we're an intern at Netflix and we need to generate a unique URL for each of these shows that needs to look something like netflix.com/loveisblind. You have a column that has, the space love space is space blind, whatever the name of the show is, and you need to condense it down to this. Okay, so we used a few different formulas. last time, mainly concatenate. That's the formula that puts together multiple pieces of text. Okay. We also used lower, which puts everything into lowercase, right? So this is an example of combining our formulas. So we talked about that last week. Some of those formula names I just mentioned might sound a little bit familiar. It can be hard to remember all of them. Some of them might be kind of new to you. So I wanted to show you what you get when you paste this exercise into an AI tool, okay? As an example of how you can use this. Okay, so I had a task that I wanted to do in Excel, which was create those URLs like I just mentioned, and I pasted this into Claude. In case you care about my 2 cents, this is my favorite of the generative AI tools. So I basically gave it this prompt, and it said, all right, let me help you create this formula. Okay, so this I think can actually be a pretty helpful learning tool for you all as you're kind of getting your feet wet with Excel. I especially like tools like this that are going to explain to you what they're doing and help you come up with the formula that you want to use. Okay, so what this one is doing is it's generating an Excel formula, right? You see the equal sign, you see our function names and our parentheses, right? So we know that this looks like an Excel formula, and it's actually going to explain to you what it did to generate this formula. So this is exactly what, as we talked about all of these functions in class last week, this is exactly how I would have sort of instructed you to come up with this formula in this particular case. So it's using the function concatenate, joins different text strings together, lower, converts text to lowercase, substitute, replaces the spaces with nothing. So we're essentially removing the spaces, okay? And then it's telling you, all right, you're gonna put whatever cell you're referring to in place where I said A1, and that's going to generate a result. And it's even going to explain to you, okay, if we had some sample data, here's some sample names of Netflix shows. This is what this formula that it gave you would spit out. Okay, so this in green, I don't know why this recording thing is popping up here. I don't know if I can move that. Okay, can't move that little box. Sorry about that. It's the same as the text that's here. It's concatenate, lower, substitute. Those are our 3 formulas that are nested together. In this case, it gave us our correct formula. This is cool. This is useful for when you're trying to figure out how to do stuff in Excel. So you're welcome to use AI tools in this class if you would like, but I wanted to give you some guidance about how to use them if you're going to do that. So these are my little, I call them Rachel's rules. I have been working in the tech space. I've worked a little bit in the data ethics space as well. So I want to think about ways to use these tools responsibly if you're going to use them while you're learning Excel or any other kind of writing or programming language you're using them for. Okay, the most important thing to know is that you should make sure that you understand what it's doing. I've seen folks kind of try to use these tools for an Excel task, and it'll generate a really complicated formula. I've seen it generate, like, it'll nest like 5 or 6 or 7 formulas together. And my advice to you as a human formula writer would be to not nest that many together because it's hard to understand and hard to debug. So I would give you that same advice for whatever the AI spits out. If you aren't able to understand what it's doing, it's probably not the right thing to use or not a very good approach. Okay, so in this case, that example we just went through, even if you're not totally clear on each of those individual formulas, the concept kind of made sense, right? We're gluing strings together, putting them in lowercase, removing spaces. That makes sense. I can understand that. That kind of checks out. The other thing that you should always do anytime you're going to try an AI tool for a formula is just try it out. Try it on 1 or 2 rows, paste it in, and make sure that the results make sense to you. This is what I call sort of like the human eye check or the gut check. Okay, make sure it looks right before you just like copy paste and keep going. Okay. The other thing, this is the biggest rule with AI, you should always assume that it's wrong. You should start with the assumption that it's wrong and convince yourself via checking that it's correct rather than the other way around. Okay, it's essentially like collaging together bits of internet information about what previous people have done with Excel. It doesn't have any sort of like internal, like I checked this and I know it's right function. It's just spitting out something that looks like an answer to you, right? So if you're going to use one of these tools, you should assume that it's not right and you should check that it is. Okay. The last thing I would say is definitely think of it as your first draft. And I think this is actually the most powerful way to use this tool. I'll say the same thing in the next workshop later this semester, which is about SQL and Python. This is a great tool to use to kind of spit out a first draft of a formula. I think I want to do this. I think it should kind of look like this. I think these are the functions I need to use. See what it spits out. Get that as your first draft, and then you can say, oh, actually, I don't want to remove the spaces. I want to replace them with dashes. I want, then from there, you can kind of tweak what it gives you, but think of it as your first draft. Definitely don't take anything that it gives you as sort of like the final product. You can't edit it. You definitely can, and I actually think that's the most powerful way to use it. Also, most of these tools will have a reminder like this at the bottom that says, I can make mistakes, please double check me. So that goes back to this rule number 2, right? Or rule number 3, make sure that if you're going to use one of these tools, you understand that it is likely to be wrong. I've typed in a lot of stuff to these as a sort of a test against my own Excel knowledge, and sometimes it's right and sometimes it's wrong, or sometimes it's right, but like way overly complicated, and that's also not useful. Okay, so this is a quick aside. I think this can be a really useful tool. This was not around, 10 years ago, 12 years ago when I was learning Excel. So certainly an interesting tool for you all to use, but just some things to keep in mind if you're going to do that. Cool. All right. So the data set that we're going to work with this week is related to podcasting. The data set we worked with last week was related to Netflix. This is some fictional data about a large podcast network that we work with. We have a lot of podcasts, 500 different shows. Okay, and we're going to have a data set, and I actually should have written we're going to have a data set, sort of a sample fictional data set that I've created that we're going to use for our exercises today. So I'm actually going to take a quick second and write this link on the board here. And if you want to download this data set, this is the one we're going to be using today. So if you'd like to work on downloading that in the next few minutes, we will be getting to our exercises with that data set. Okay, but when you look at that data set, you're going to see a few different pieces of information about our podcast and the advertisements running on those podcasts, and that's the data set that we're going to look at today. All right. If anyone has any trouble with the link, let me know. Okay. So the meat of what we're going to talk about today are 2 very useful formulas called VLOOKUP and XLOOKUP. We're going to start with VLOOKUP. What VLOOKUP is going to do is it's going to take a value, search for that value somewhere else, and then return a value associated with it. Okay, so what that means, let's look at our sample data set. This is the data set that we're all going to be working with today. You'll see we have a few different, I put in a few different tabs or sheets here along the bottom that are labeled. So we have shows, episodes, campaign participation, and campaigns. Okay, so we can look at a show. We see that we have an ID, we have a first name, last name, email, we have a podcast title, monthly downloads, this is how many downloads our podcast gets in a month, and the category. I think I set this as view only, but as folks are getting to this link, just make sure you download your own copy of this to edit. You shouldn't be editing in this copy, okay? All right, so this is some information about our shows. On our episodes tab, you'll see we have another ID column. We have a show ID column. So this is referencing in our shows, we also had an ID, an identifier. Show ID is what's gonna link it back to this tab, okay? We have the date the episode was uploaded, what's the MP3 audio file called, and how many minutes long is that episode. Okay. This is the data that we have about this campaign or the episodes for our shows. We have our campaigns tab. So this is a very simple data set. This is only 6 rows long. These are the names of some ad campaigns and whether or not they require our hosts to personally endorse the product. That's what the host has to say. I used this Quip toothbrush and I loved it. Okay, that's what that means, common kind of thing in podcast advertising. And then our last tab in here is campaign participation. Okay, campaign participation. Sorry, just got a weird Zoom thing. Okay, I think we're fine. So this is gonna have a campaign ID, a ad campaign name. So this is the name of our campaign, the show ID. So this connects it back to the shows tab that we had, and our CPM. Quick aside on advertising, for those of you who might not know, a CPM is typically how advertisements are priced in the podcast advertising world. So these are dollar amounts. CPM stands for cost per mil, which is basically cost per thousand. So basically what this means is if you want to buy 1,000 impressions of your ad on a podcast, you want it to be heard 1,000 times, it might cost you $22 or $36 to run it 1,000 times. Okay, so it's like just a common price unit. All right, so the reason I wanted to kind of talk through this data set is you can see already from these tabs that there's a few different ways that this data connects with each other, right? Let's say that you want a list of names of all the shows that are doing this DoorDash campaign, right? That's a pretty common thing you might want, but we don't have the name of the show. We just have the ID of the show in this case. Okay, so in this case, so the show ID number 1 is in this DoorDash campaign. So to see the title of that show, we'd have to go over to our shows tab. We could look at show number 1. We could see that this podcast is called Adrenaline Hobbies. Okay, great. Then I would go back to this tab and say, all right, the next show that's in the DoorDash campaign is 11. So then I'd have to go back to my shows tab. I'd have to look at show number 11. That show is called Art Content. You could see that would get really tedious to do for every single show, right? So VLOOKUP is the formula that does that. It says, all right, given this value, given a show ID, I'll go look it up in whatever other place you tell me. So we'll tell it to go look up in this tab, and I'll grab any other piece of information associated with show ID number 1 that you want. I could grab its monthly downloads, I could grab its title, whatever else. Okay, so concept of VLOOKUP makes sense. Problem solving. Okay. So let's talk a little bit about how it's going to work. So these are our arguments for VLOOKUP. Remember, arguments are the pieces of information that we're going to give our function so that it can give us our desired result. Okay, so lookup value is the first thing we're going to give it. Lookup value is the piece of information that links your 2 data sources. So in this case, that's our show ID, right? There's a show ID in that tab that we're in, and there's a show ID on our shows tab. Okay, so that's how we're going to connect the 2. Table array, this is that other table that you want it to go look at. So this is when I went back over to that shows tab to look at all of our details about our shows. That's our table array. Then I'm going to give it a column index number. That just means I'm going to tell it which column I want it to grab information for. So in this case, when I'm looking at show ID 11 and I go over to our shows tab and I say, okay, here's show ID 11, which piece of information? I have 6 columns of information here about show 11. Which one do you want? Do you want the first one, second one, third one, etc.? So we'll give it a number to tell it which number column of what we've selected we want to give back. Okay. All right, and then lastly, there's this one kind of funky one at the end, which is a logical value. That basically just means whether it should find the closest match, like what's called a fuzzy match, or if you want the text to match exactly. Now, I wouldn't really recommend using the fuzzy match feature. I pretty much always set this to false and recommend that you do too, because you wouldn't want it to do a fuzzy match and say, oh, 11 looks pretty close to 1. Let's assume that show 11 could refer to show number 1. That's the sort of thing a fuzzy match might do. And that's not very useful if you're matching on something like IDs, which are very exact, right? We're not trying to match, Ted and Theodore in 2 different data sets. We're matching on numbers. So false just tells it that we don't want our fuzzy matching. We only want to match on exact values. So here's a little simple example of what a VLOOKUP formula looks like. Hopefully that little Zoom thing isn't in the way. Okay, so we could imagine this is our data set. This is a simplified data set for the purposes of demonstration, where we have our orders. So maybe this is the order system for the cafe downstairs. And we have our menus and our prices. Okay, drip coffee is $2, matcha latte is $6, cappuccino is $6.50. Okay. So we could imagine in our orders table, we want to know how much coffee did we sell today? What was our total revenue from all these sales? So in order to figure that out, we'd say, okay, we sold one cappuccino, that's $6.50. We sold another cappuccino, that's $6.50, right? We essentially want to add a column here with the price of everything that we sold, which we have as like a reference over here. Does that make sense? So if we had a column here that had the price for all of these order numbers, we could do a sum at the bottom, and that would give us our total revenue for the day. So what we would do is we would use VLOOKUP to add this column. I'm just going to call it item price. And all item price is going to do is for each item, it's going to go look in our menu, in our price sheet, grab the right price and bring it back to this column so that we could do something like add up our total revenue. Okay, so here's how this would look. I would add a new column here. I'm going to call it item price. I'm going to do my equal sign. I'm going to do VLOOKUP because that's the name of our function. I'm going to open my parentheses. I'm going to say, what's that value that I want to look up? What's linking my two data tables? And in that case, it's the item name. So cappuccino. So I'm going to go select this cell, which in this case was M13. Okay. Then I'm going to go select all the cells that I want it to go look at. So I need to go tell it where my menu is. So I'm going to select all these cells here. You'll notice there's dollars. So this is saying I12 to J15. That just is what this range happens to be. There's dollar signs in front of each of those, which I'll come back to in a second. So I'm over in this range. I'm giving it my number 2. That's my column index. The reason is because I want these, of the 2 columns I'm having it look at, I want the second one. I don't want it to say, okay, here's cappuccino, and in my item price column, put the word cappuccino again. It's not very useful to me. I want it to put 650, which is in my second column, which is why I'm going to give it the number 2. Okay, and then I'm going to give it false because I want it to be matching exactly. I can say my spelling is perfectly matching. I can considering those unique identifiers. Okay. All right. So let's take a look at this in our data set. Okay. Let's go over here.
Question.
Yeah.
So why is it 2 instead of like just including the price column?
Great question. So because basically what VLOOKUP, the assumption that VLOOKUP is making is that this ID, the matching column that you're giving it is the first one in your other data set. It's going to be that first column is the thing that matches. So even if you give it like 20 columns, it's only going to look in that first column for something to match your reference value. So if you've given it the 20 columns, it just wants to know which one of those would you like it to grab and bring back. Yeah. So it's because of that assumption that it's making. Okay. All right, let's do this. Why don't I have everybody open up your data set? And let's kind of work through one of these as an example together. Okay. So go ahead and go to that link, download the data set. Did anyone have any issues with that link? Go set to like, okay, actually I didn't screw it up. Okay. So what we are going to do is we are going to add a column to our shows sheet in that workbook called upload date. Okay. We're going to use the VLOOKUP to essentially find the earliest date that a show was uploaded, which we can tell our data set. So here's our show tab. We see we don't have anything about dates in this tab, but we have in our episodes, we have an upload date and we have a show associated. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to go over to our shows tab. We're going to add a column right here. I call it upload date. And we're going to do our VLOOKUP formula. So you can do this along with me. So I'm going to do my equal sign. I'm going to do VLOOKUP. I see I'm getting my little pop-up, which is great. So returns the first search result in a vertical list. Perfect, that's what I want. I'm gonna open my parentheses and then it's gonna give me my little help text. Again, depending on the version of Excel you're using, you may get it here, you may get it on the right-hand side, but this is always super helpful. Okay, so first thing I need to give it is my lookup value. This is the thing that appears in this table and my other table. So what is my lookup value in this situation?
Oh, the ID number.
ID, exactly. So I'm gonna go look up my show ID because that's the only one of these columns that also appears in my other sheet. Okay, that's what I want it to go look up. All right, table array. So from the table from which the data is retrieved. So basically, where do I want to go get my data from? In this case, the piece of information I want, which is when was an episode uploaded, is on my episodes tab. So I'm still in my formula editor here, but I'm just going to go with my mouse. I'm going to click over to this tab and we'll see our formula generator. Right, I've still got my formula open up here, so it's still in formula editing mode. And I'm going to select all of these. And you'll see as I'm moving my mouse here, it's changing the range that it's selecting. So it's A1 to E8, E9, etc. I'm just going to scroll all the way down. Should have done my keyboard shortcut for this, but I started with the mouse, so it's too late. If you're doing this on your keyboard, you can do Shift Command arrow key down, and that'll grab the full kind of all the cells that are filled in. Tedious way right now. Ooh, okay. All right. So this is flags a little bit up here. All right. So episodes, exclamation point, A1 to E456. Okay, this is that whole rectangle of data that I just selected because that's the whole rectangle that I want it to go look in for when I do this, okay? All right, column index number. All right, so what number of column do I want? Of course, this little thing is blocking it right now. So I get this up out of the way. Okay, so I can see that my upload date is in my third column. Okay, it's in my third column. So I'm gonna put number 3 right here. And then I'm gonna put false. You'll see it gives me a little reminder, approximate match or exact match. General, when you're doing Excel, you're gonna want exact matches. So I'm just gonna type the word false here. Okay, now this looks pretty good as far as a VLOOKUP formula goes, so I'm gonna hit enter. All right, but we got a couple things that we need to fix. Again, this isn't fully correct yet. Please go away. Okay. All right, so I went and grabbed a date and instead I got this weird number 45332. Anyone remember from last week what to do if you get a cell that looks weird? Muttering, somebody yell it out.
Change to date.
Change to date, yes. Okay, so I'm gonna go over here. I'm gonna go to my, sorry. I'm gonna go to my number formatting menu, which is right here. I'm gonna change this to date. Perfect. I'm gonna say February 10th, 2024. Okay, now one more piece of information that we want to double check. So if you might recall, I'm gonna go back to the top in this tab. Okay. What our VLOOKUP is doing is it's gonna look for our ID in that first column of the data that we give it. And then it's going to go and grab the number column that we tell it. So in this case, we gave it this whole chunk of data. So we said, look in this column for our show ID, and then go grab the third column over, which is our date. Anyone see any potential problems with that?
It's using the ID, not the show.
It's using the ID, not the show ID. Very good. Okay, so when I went and grabbed that whole rectangle, the rectangle that I grabbed, let's go back to my formula editor so we can take a look, was A1 to E456 on my episode sheet. So I'm going to go back to my episode sheet, just a quick aside, this is a good reason to label your tabs when you're doing multiple kind of tabbed analysis. If you give your tab a name, it's much clearer to see in your formula, which if they're versus their sheet 2, sheet 3, it's not as obvious what you're doing. Okay, so I labeled it as my episodes tab, so I'm gonna go back over here. I gave it this range from A1 over, so it's gonna look in this column, which is my episode ID, not my show ID. So my formula like worked, right? It gave me a date back. But if we go and look, this isn't gonna be a date for show number 1. This is gonna be a date related to episode number 1. Okay, which is, that's February 10th. It grabbed this one, which is actually related to show 143. Okay, so this is an example of the kind of thing that if you were going to use AI to generate this formula and paste it in, that like sort of jump is something you might not catch, that like the AI might not get right. Okay, so this is why it's important to like think through, okay, I know it's going to match my show ID to my other column. Is that what it's doing? That's why it's important to read what's going on and not just take what it's saying for granted. Yeah. Okay, so my fix for that is to fix my block of data that I gave it in my second argument. Okay, so I'm going to click back into here. I'm going to use my little expander thingy just so I can pop back up my little reference. Okay, table array from which it is retrieved. So I'm going to give this, instead of starting to look in column A, I'm going to tell it to start looking in column B, because column B is actually where my show ID number is. All right. One last change I need to make. Enter so we can see it. Okay, so I changed my the date that I'm getting, but now I'm not getting a date in here anymore. I'm getting my MP3 file. Okay, why am I getting my MP3 file? Because I said, go start looking in column B. And if you find a match in column B, give me the third column over, which in this case is our audio file name. That's not right, right? If I'm starting at B, I need to make one other edit, which is go look in the second column, not the third. Yeah. Go back to my formula over here, make one more edit. I'm going to say don't look in the third column anymore because we fixed our other argument. Actually, go look in our second column, February 6th. Okay, awesome. And if we went to our episodes tab and manually scroll down to where we saw our show number 1, which is probably going to take, it's going to be too hard to scroll on multiple screens, but if you were to manually scroll down, we would see that show number 1 had an episode uploaded on February 6th. Okay, it went and found that piece of information for us. All right, any questions about what we just did to get here? Yeah.
I have 2 questions. So what is ID? What does ID mean in this, on this page?
Yeah, great question. So this is sort of a common data thing. Any column that's sort of the unique identifier for this certain data set. So in this case, our data set is just shows. If you see ID, it's usually fair to assume it's going to be a unique ID for that column.
Okay, I guess let me clarify. So ID in reference to show ID, what's the difference?
Great question. So on our, if we go in our episodes tab, we see our episodes also have an ID. Right? You could imagine another data set where we have more pieces of information about each episode, maybe guests that were featured on each episode. Maybe some episodes have 4 guests. There'd be 4 lines in there that says guest A was on episode 2 and guest B was in episode 2, etc. So yeah, just another identifier.
Okay, and then my follow-up question for the upload date, could we have possibly just sorted it on the episodes page and then copied and pasted to the first one?
Absolutely.
Okay.
We could have done that. Now, something to know is that each show might have multiple episodes. Okay, so if we sort it, for example, I think we did we talk about sorting last week? Okay, just to review sorting, if we did not, if you click anywhere in your data set, so any of your cells that are filled in, and then you do Command A or Control A on a PC, that will get your whole just like area with data filled in. To sort, you can come over to your little funnel icon in your toolbar, sort and filter. I always like to do this as filter, even though I'm about to sort, and I'll explain why. Once you say filter, it's going to give you a little sort filter thing at the top of each column, which I just find a little easier to use. So I'm going to go over here. We can see that this was originally sorted by our episode ID, right? Just eyeballing it intuitively. I can come over here and I can sort by show ID. So let's do that. Say smallest to largest. Others are also making changes. Okay, if anybody's in here editing this sheet, download your own copy and go edit your sheet in your own Excel. Okay, do you want to see sorting and filtering from others? No, I just see mine. Okay. All right. Great. Okay. So you can see when I sort by show ID, show number 1 has 2 different episodes uploaded. Show 2, show 3, they each have 1. Show 4 actually has no episodes. So it'd be kind of a pain to just sort and copy paste, because if I did this, I'd have to say, okay, I'm just going to grab the first one. And then for 2, 3, I can copy paste those. But then I actually need to skip a line for 5, 6 when I go copy paste. So that would be kind of a pain. If you had a like perfect data set that was 1-to-1, that would work just fine. That would probably be faster. Okay. Any other questions? But yeah.
Explain again, like why we should put the false at the end.
Why we should put the false at the end? Yeah, great question. So let's go back over to our formula right here. Okay, let's get this little pop up. Here we go. Okay. Okay, so basically what this is going to do is this is just going to give you a true or false option. Your option is you can have it do a closest match, which is like whatever the Excel algorithm thinks these 2 cells are very close, or is it an exact match? So just like the spelling and the characters of the cell match exactly. The point of having a fuzzy match is so that you could like say you have a data set of names and you're trying to match on names. And one guy's name is like Ted in this sheet and it's Teddy in this sheet. What the fuzzy match is going to do is going to say that like Ted and Teddy are like close enough. I'm going to count them as a match. Typically, like as a data person, I almost never use that function because I would rather check with my eyeballs if Ted and Teddy are actually the same person or not. Because if they're not, I don't want to be like exposing somebody's private data to this guy named Ted just because he has a similar name. Make sense? So by default, Excel is going to do this like fuzzy match. So it says true or omitted. That means if you don't put comma like if you just do 2 and then close parentheses, by default, it's going to do its fuzzy match. So I always do comma false so that I'm getting exact match. Cool, good question. All right. How are we feeling? Everybody else feeling okay so far? Questions? Okay. So one more kind of piece of information I need to know about the lookup. So I have this here. This is pulling up my correct date. So the next thing I'm going to want to do is I'm going to copy paste this formula down. So let's do that. In this case, I'm just going to do our next few cells for the purposes of demonstration. Okay, we got a few interesting things happening here. Okay, first thing that's happening, let's compare what happens from this first row where we wrote our formula originally to our second row. Okay, so in our first row, we had A2. We're looking at B1 to E456. We're going in column 2 and we're going false. Okay, I'm going to move my arrow key down 1 to go to the next row. And let's look at what it's doing. So it's looking at A3. So let's check if that's right. So it's coming over to A3, which is this cell right here. As the value, it's going to go look up. That makes sense, right? This second row is show number 2. I want it to go look up show ID number 2 in my other table. That makes sense. That one's good. My next thing, B2 to E457. So the block of cells that it's going to go look up it's going to go look for show number 2 in is slightly different than my previous row, right? I was previously looking in rows 1 to 456, columns B to E. Here I'm still looking in columns B to E, but I'm looking in rows 2 to 457. Now, why is that a little weird? Because if I go in my episodes tab and I scroll down to, say, row 457. Great. Row 457 is blank. Yeah, because my data set ended at 456. That's why I selected it that way in the first place. So interesting. If I go to my next row where I've copy pasted this next one down, I'm going to see that it's looking for the show ID that's in cell A4, ID 3. That looks good. Still looking in columns B to E. That makes sense to me. But now it's looking in column B, or it's looking in rows 3 to 458. So when in this row, what this formula is going to do is it's going to go over here to episodes and it's going to say, all right, I'm going to start looking for this one at row 3, and I'm gonna come down to row 58. So now I've got 2 blank rows, but more importantly, if I go back up to the top, it's only gonna start looking right here. Okay, because it's gonna start looking at cell B3. So if some information about that episode happened to be, or that show happened to be in this row up above, it's starting to miss that, right? You can see it's like moving the block down each time, and it's gonna start missing information. So how do we avoid that? How do we fix that problem? That is where the weird dollar signs from earlier come into play. So when I pulled up this example before, from our cappuccino example, it was looking at cells I12 to J15, which are these cells, but where I had dollar signs in front of each of them. What the dollar signs are gonna do is lock those cells in place. So it's gonna say, even if you copy paste this formula all the way down the column, I still only want you to look at exactly I12, J15. I don't want you in the next row to go look at rows 13 to 16, and then, because for this menu, you're gonna be just looking at a blank thing, just a few rows down. Okay, so the dollar signs are called an absolute cell reference. Okay, so absolute cell reference just means it's sort of like the same thing as an absolute value from math, right? It's kind of like locking it in place to say, we're always gonna look exactly here. I don't want you to move it down and do that same logic that you do with, for example, where it moves us from looking at A2 to A3 to A4. That's a place where it makes sense, right? We want it, as we paste this formula down, we want it to kind of keep moving down with us for that ID, but we don't want it to do that for this block, because it's gonna move down and start looking at the empty thing. So the last fix I'm gonna do here is I'm gonna come in, and before each letter and number in my formula, I'm just gonna type in dollar signs. Okay, so I'm typing in a dollar sign before column B, before row 1, before column E, before row 456. Okay, I'm gonna hit enter. And that's done the exact same thing. My value here hasn't changed. It's still February 6th, but you'll notice I'm gonna copy paste this down again. I'm gonna paste over what I just did. And now you'll see in my second row here, it's going to look in A3 for the ID. That's still good, but in this block of cells it's going to go look at, it's still looking at B1 to E456 because I've locked those cells in place with those dollar signs. Okay. And I can see that continues as I go down. So any cell I've looked at is still going to be looking in rows 1 to 456 on my other tab. So it's always looking at that same clear data set. Okay. Any questions about what the dollar signs are doing? All right, so we can go ahead and paste this all the way down now, but I've already noticed something else a little weird that's going on in my data set. Why do we think that I'm getting an NA in this row right here?
Yeah, you said there was nothing for show 4.
Ah, okay, great. I can check this with my eyeballs. So what this formula is doing, right, is it's saying go find show ID number 4 in column B. So I'm going to go over to my episodes and look in column B and see if I can just manually find show number 4. And since we've already sorted it, I can see that it skipped show 4. So actually, for some reason in this data set, I don't have any record of any episodes for show number 4. For some reason, maybe it's a brand new show, it hasn't uploaded any episodes yet, or maybe something's wrong with this data set and it missed episodes from show number 4 for some reason. Okay, so it's missing, and so it can't find the upload date to grab because there is no date, there is no show number 4. So it's giving me this little error note. All right, so this is sort of a common thing you'll see with VLOOKUP if you don't find, and you'll see it with other formulas as well. If it's sort of like not finding a value it's expecting to find, you'll get this weird little NA thing. That's fine, that can work totally fine. You can use it to filter by, for example. So if you have this whole column and you want to filter out the not found ones, you can use it. It can be a little weird to look at. It always has this little corner thing like pop up, like this is an error. And that's not always the best sort of experience if, say, you're putting together a sheet for your boss and you want to have like a nice clear thing that's going on. So there's one other formula I pretty commonly use with VLOOKUP to make that error look a little nicer. All right, do I have a couple of it? Okay, here we go. So there's another formula called if error, which will basically say if whatever other thing you're doing causes an error, causes that weird pound NA, error cell, you can give it a nice little message to say instead. I use this with VLOOKUP all the time because it's a little bit more clear to someone I'm sharing the sheet with why there might be an error, that it's not like a error with my formula. I can sort of explain like the business reason for the error to be there. Okay, so basically what I'm going to do with VLOOKUP and what I pretty commonly do is I'll write my whole VLOOKUP formula like I just did, make sure it makes sense. And then once I know that's working, I'll sort of come and wrap this formula around. So I'll take my VLOOKUP thing that whole thing I just typed, and I'm going to insert that right here where in this example it says A2. So that nesting formulas thing we talked about at the end of the last class. Okay, so I'm going to come in here. And once again, I'm going to edit from the top. And I'm going to wrap my if error formula around this whole thing. So I'm going to type it in right here, if error, open parentheses. All right, and you'll see it gives me a reminder. So my two arguments here are the value. So go check some value or expression or other cell, whatever. Go check that thing. And if there's an error, I can put in quotes a second thing that it'll replace that error with. So in this case, this whole VLOOKUP is my first argument, right? This whole VLOOKUP is that first value that I wanted to go see. Did that VLOOKUP cause an error for some reason? And then I'm going to type in a message that's a little more human readable that would explain to someone why there's an error. So in this case, I'm going to type in not found in episodes sheet. Just forgot my closing parentheses, so it got mad at me. Close quotes, close parentheses. Great, okay, so you'll see for this first cell where I made that edit, it didn't change. It didn't change because this wasn't an error, right? The cell is saying, if it's an error, do this other thing, but if it's not an error, it's just gonna give me that, whatever my value was, okay? And whatever my value was is that VLOOKUP that we wrote, 5 minutes ago. Okay, so now one more time, I'm gonna paste this formula down my column.
How do you do the paste?
Oh, great. Yeah, great question. There's a few ways to do it. For the purposes of this demo, all I did was I did Command C or Control C if you're on a PC, and then I did Shift Command down arrow. I just did down a few cells for the purposes of this, and then I did Command V or Control V. But I could also paste it all the way down that way. So I could do. I've done my Command C. I could do my Shift Command down, goes to where the data is currently populated. I could do Shift Command down again, that would go clear to the bottom of my sheet. And then I could do Command V to paste that formula all the way down if I wanted to. I usually don't paste all the way down to the bottom of the sheet because it's like a bazillion rows. And all these are going to show up as not found in episode sheet because blank values were not found in episode sheet.
Yeah, I don't think I'm following. Or I think I'm just having an issue
with the copy paste part.
Yeah.
What I would say to try first is to just try like pasting it down one row into the next cell and see if that.
Command C, then Command B, no?
Yep. Oh. Yeah, give that a try. Okay, so once we do that, we see now I get, instead of that weird error pop up, I get this nicer message about what's not found. This is especially useful because now if I wanted to say filter out these ones that aren't found or filter them, I could select them all. Keyboard shortcut for that is Command A or Control A. So I've grabbed all those. I can come to my home ribbon and do my filter, my sort and filter icon on the right. I always like to do filter. And then now when I get my little filter pop up on my upload column, I'm going to come look at that. And I could see, I could filter for dates, or I could filter in or out just these ones that aren't found. Okay, so maybe I want to go say to my data colleague, like, hey, I think something's wrong with our episode data. We're missing episodes for a lot of shows. And he says, all right, which shows? I could say these ones right here. I'm going to apply the filter just for these ones that are not found. So It's just sort of a way to like overwrite the error message, but anytime you're sharing a sheet with someone else, or even future you, if this is a sheet you're gonna reuse in 2 weeks, you might not quite remember what you were doing. It's nice to leave a little note for yourself. It's just frozen. Okay. Any questions about this formula we just put together?
Select the range of episodes, P1 with the.
Yep.
That's it. What's the easiest way to select all of those without dragging?
Yes, great question. So I would come over here. Yeah, so I guess I'll write it from scratch so you can see. So I would do VLOOKUP. I'm just gonna write the same thing again. So I'm gonna grab my show ID, comma. I would click over to my episodes tab. I would click in just any of these cells and I would hit Command A. There we go. Oh, that's, all right, sorry, I'm writing my formula. I'm in here. I would hit Command A. The other thing you can do is here you can do Shift Command right, and that'll get you over to here. Sorry, I'm all frozen. Or Shift Command down will get you all the way down. Yeah. Slow. But yeah, that's the faster way versus like scrolling all the way down. All right. Other questions? Right. Okay. One last comment about VLOOKUP. So what it's doing is it's going to go look for the first match that it finds. Okay. So for example, for show number 1, if we remember, we have 2 different episodes for show number 1. We have one that was published February 6th and one that was published February 10th. And my VLOOKUP formula has gotten me February 6th because that was the first row that it found. It went looking from row 1 down. It found the first time it found show 1, it said, here's my value. And then it moved on to figure it out for show 2. Okay. So you can decide if you want it to grab the oldest episode or the most recent episode based on how this tab is sorted. So let me show you what that looks like. So in this case, I just sorted by show ID and it did some, it just kind of happened to get these 2 in order. You can see, for example, for show 12, they're not in order. I had 1 episode published February 6th and actually 2 episodes published on February 5th. Maybe they did a bonus episode or something. So I'm not necessarily consistently getting my earliest date or my most recent date because VLOOKUP's just going to grab the first one that it finds. So the way that I can be a little smarter and I can say which one do you want to grab first is I can sort this data set by my date column. So if I say, let's sort newest to oldest, I want it to grab the most recent episode uploaded date. So I want it to find the newest one first. All right. Then if I come back to my shows tab, I'm going to see that this has changed, right? This said February 6th before. Now it says February 10th. The reason it says February 10th is because I sorted all the episodes in reverse chronological order. So I have the most recent date. So when it went looking for show number 1, it scrolled through all these February 11th ones. It didn't find one. Then it went through all the February 10th ones. It found one for show number 1, grabbed that February 10th date and moved on. If I switch my sort order in this tab, let's say I want to sort from oldest to newest instead of newest to oldest, I can just click on my little header here and switch and sort this way. So now I'm just sorting my whole data set in this tab the other way. February 5th. Okay, so now I understand why some shows might be missing. This is only a week's worth of episode data. Okay, my whole data set only goes February 5th, February 11th. That's probably why some of the shows are missing. But if I go back to my shows tab now, this one says February 6th again, because it's grabbing the first one based on my sort. So that's the last piece of the puzzle. In this case, what I wanted to do was to get the earliest upload date. So say we're looking at the week of February 6th to 11th, and I want to answer the question, what was the first episode that every show posted that week? When did they post their first episode of the week? And that, because I sorted for earliest date first, I'm getting the earliest date for each show. Make sense? All right. Pretty cool. All right. Okay, so we talked about our if error and our VLOOKUP formula. So I just want to do a quick reminder about how we did our formula nesting, okay? Because this is sort of the next level. Once you kind of have an initial formula, this is sort of how you build on that knowledge. So what I would recommend for everyone at this stage is if you're going to use multiple formulas, write them out in separate columns first to make sure you get each one working. And then once you know that they're working, you can do the sort of substitution or sort of replacing an argument of one function with a whole other function. Okay, so earlier, right, I told you about this if error function that I like to use with my VLOOKUP. I went in here and I just immediately wrapped it around, right? I had my VLOOKUP and then I just went and typed in the same cell. Something else that I could have done instead is I could have just left my VLOOKUP. Let's do this. All right. I'm gonna call this VLOOKUP only. Do my equal sign in this cell. I'm gonna do my whole thing. All right, start from A2. Cool. All right, I got my whole formula. Hit enter. It's doing the weird date thing again. So remember, I'm gonna go to my number format menu and change it to date. All right, great. So to test my error formula, let's call this if error. I could just do if error, open parentheses, go look in this cell, and then a nice error message. All right, and if I copy, oh, that's trying to get me at the date. I want that to be general. Or sorry, let's be date as well. There we go. Okay. So now if I copy these two formulas down just a little bit, you'll see that they're sort of breaking down into steps what this column is doing all at once. So this column is just doing the VLOOKUP portion, and then column J that I just added here isn't doing VLOOKUP again. It's just saying, go look in this other column, whatever it's doing. And if there's an error, replace it with another message. So in this case, all it's saying is go look in I5, and if there's an error there, print a nice error message. It went and looked in I5, it found this weird error thing, and it just printed a nice error message. Okay, so basically the important concept here is that column I and J together are doing the same thing as column H is doing. But column H is that nested formula concept. It's doing those two steps at once. All right, so as you're learning, this is a little easier to wrap your head around to do each sort of formula in its own columns. And if you're doing it this way and you're kind of more comfortable doing it this way rather than starting to nest them, which can get a little more complicated, you can totally do that and then just hide the column, your sort of intermediate columns. Okay, so I can imagine if let's say I hadn't done column H, I did column I to get my VLOOKUP, I did column J to print my nice error message. I could just come in and right click my column I and tell it to hide my column. And then it would just give me this nice clean column that I could, email the sheet to my boss, whatever, without having to deal with nesting my formulas. Okay, so just so you understand, that's what nesting formulas is doing. It's just kind of condensing into a column. You can also do it individually. Okay. Yeah, questions? How do you unhide the column? Great question. You select the adjacent columns to it, and then you're going to right click again or control click, depending on your setup. And then you can come down and you'll see an option to unhide any hidden. Yeah. So don't be afraid if you hide your columns, you can always go find them again. All right. All right, so I sort of skipped ahead. We did this part, right? We replaced our not found error with a nice error message. So I'm gonna have you all now work on adding another VLOOKUP formula. You can add if error as a nested formula, or you can add it in that same or in the adjacent column if you'd like. But what I want to add here is the show title to my campaign participation tab. So if everyone has a copy of this data set open, and please open your own copy. What I want to do is I want to go to this campaign participation tab. You should add a column here called show title. And you should write a VLOOKUP formula that looks up what the show title is and adds it to this tab. Okay, so I'm going to give everyone a few minutes to take a stab at that. And I'm going to put up the previous one. Did I spell it out somewhere? Yeah, I'll put up this example. So you can kind of see, you should be writing something that kind of looks like that as a new column in the campaign participation tab of your data set. You should be adding the show title. That tab right now only has our show ID. I want it to have our show title. Okay, so I'm going to give everybody a minute to work on that. If you're totally stuck, wave your hand and I'll come help. It's up here, but I'll just paste our little example down on the bottom. So it's all on one screen. Right. Anyone gotten the show title column using VLOOKUP? Yeah, right here. All right, you want to tell us what you got? Equals. VLOOKUP. Remember, it's just a convention that they're in all caps. You can type them lowercase if you want. Brackets, open parentheses. C2. Okay, great. So I went to C2 because it's my show ID that's in the same row. Perfect.
Did a comma and then went to shows.
I went to shows.
All the way from A1 to E500.
Right. Well, I'm just gonna type that for the purposes of speed. Okay.
Comma 5,
5.
then comma false.
False.
$.
All right, great. So you did column 5 because what?
Podcast title is in column 5.
It's in the 5th column over, right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. That's my 5th column. Unfortunately, the columns are letters, so you do have to manually count unless you have the letter number combos memorized. I do not. Okay. And what was the last thing you said?
I added $signs in front of
I added the dollar signs. And why did you add the dollar signs?
so it stays.
So it stays. Yes. Very good. This is our absolute cell reference. This is just saying always look in these rows. Even if I'm copy pasting this formula somewhere else, keep these rows glued in place. Okay. Then I did my closing bracket. I'm going to hit enter. Okay, cool. Got a result. And again, I always want to go double check with my eyes that this makes sense. So this was show number 1. The title was Adrenaline Hobbies. I would want to go to my shows tab and make sure that that is in fact the title of show number 1, which it is. Question?
When you drag to include everything,
Mhm.
is there a way to put the dollar sign in without having to remember to do it manually?
That's a good question. I think when I used to do Excel on a PC, I think you could do shift I think you could do like shift and then control A and it would put the dollar signs in for you. I don't know the Mac. I don't know that there's a Mac thing for it, so I type them in. If anyone knows if there's a Mac shortcut for that, let me know. That would save me some time. But I don't know what it is. Cool. All right. Did anyone get an error with their formula? Anyone run into an error here? Or did anyone get a value that's not adrenaline hot for this first row? Hey, doing all right. Oh, amazing. What's the shortcut? Command T. Okay, let's try that. Yep.
And then add in.
Right, I still need these guys. Okay. Yeah, this thing is, all right. To E. Thank you.
Highlight from A to E.
Uh-huh. And then Command T. Oh, no, that opened a new tab for me. I'm in the browser, so some of the shortcuts might also be a little screwy. The Excel version that's on my computer is from 2018 because I'm old. And XLOOKUP, the next formula we're going to talk about, was only added to Excel in 2019. So I actually can't teach you XLOOKUP from Excel in my computer. So that's why I'm in the browser. But if you have the browser or the downloaded like application Excel, that's probably better than this. And if you do, you can use this cool trendy new shortcut. What was your name? Ann. Okay, that Ann taught us. All right. Okay, so I'm gonna go back to my campaign participation tab. I'm gonna add my dollar signs back in since I deleted them. So I'm gonna go 100. No, I already auto-populating something else. Okay, and I'm just gonna manually add my dollar signs in.
What's the shortcut again to copy all the data?
Should be Command A to copy everything. All right, so I put my formula back to the way it was. So again, we're looking at C2. That is our show ID. I'm looking in my shows table from columns A to E, rows 1 to 500. I'm looking for my fifth column because that's where my title information is stored. And I'm doing false because I'm doing an exact match on this number. All right, now if I want to paste this all the way down, I can just hover on my little corner right here until my little plus sign changes. I can double tap my little corner, just a double click on my mouse pad, and then I can get my formula copied all the way down, okay? Again, whenever you're copy pasting, you always want to just go check a few cells, make sure they make sense. So this one, it is going to look for show that's in C3. That's the correct row. That makes sense. But it's still looking in rows 1 through 500 in my cell reference. That looks good. That looks great. I'm just going to eyeball a few down. Looks like my first argument is changing to match the row, but that other one is staying glued in place. That's exactly what I want. All right. Cool. All right. We're going to try this one more time. We're going to do, we're now going to add one more column about personal endorsement. So is personal endorsement required for this campaign? Okay, so you're going to add another column next to the one that we just made. Add a column called personal endorsement. Make that wider just for fun. Okay, and what you want to do is do another VLOOKUP. But the piece of information you're going to grab is from this campaigns tab. This campaigns tab is a pretty simple little data set. This is just what's the name of our campaign and is it personal endorsement required, true or false? Ooh, bring on the chair. Personal endorsement, true or false, okay? So you're going to add a column here that grabs the correct true or false value with VLOOKUP and puts it in this column. Okay. If you're feeling comfortable with that, you can try adding an if error.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Please compare the cat.
Sure.
I'm still stuck with the last one.
Okay.
Because I'm not pretty sure what
Arguments. Basically, so it looks like you got an extra closing bracket right here. So it thinks you've only typed in one argument. And you got, yes, do that and hit enter. There you go. Okay. No, you're all good.
I'm okay.
Yeah. No, you're good.
You said Command A.
The other thing, you shift right, the like right arrow. And then the right arrow. Yeah, then you can do shift command down, go all the way down. Yeah, there you go. That's probably the best way to do it. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, if you can't get the command A to work, you can do shift command like over to the right and shift command down on the arrow keys, and that'll go across it down for selecting everything.
How do I know if I have like an old Excel? Do you know how to?
Check your version. I think you can go in, like in the top where it says like Excel, you should be able, there should be some like settings or info or something like that. Yeah. It should have a year in there somewhere. 2024, cool. Yeah, I believe USC should have 2024 Microsoft Office for everybody. So if you don't have the newest one, you should be able to get it from somebody in the digital lounge here. Actually, maybe I should look into it for myself as well. Okay, anybody have VLOOKUP working for personal endorsement? Over here? What you got?
So equals VLOOKUP
Equals VLOOKUP,
to B2 for the campaign participation.
B2. All right, that's the name of my campaign.
Then I went to campaigns,
All right, comma, then I went to campaigns.
$$sign A, $1 to B7.
All right, so I'm gonna do my $sign since the nifty new shortcut that I learned doesn't work for me in the browser. I'm gonna type them in. All right, great, comma,
$2, false.
comma 2, and you did comma 2 because?
Because that was the column, the personal endorsement column.
Great, yep, so it's the personal endorsement info is in that second column, column 2, and then comma false. Very good, okay. So, got my false, and I'm gonna copy this all the way down. Easiest way to copy it all the way down is my browser will cooperate with me. Oh, Zoom is popping up something, okay. Okay, all right, great. So once you have your formula, you can paste it all the way down. You have your little plus sign. If you hover just exactly on that little corner, it'll change colors. And then you can double click and it'll paste all the way down. Okay, all of these are coming up as false. That makes sense because we can see this appears like it might be sorted by campaign, right? So this is the same DoorDash April 1st value that it's looking up. So it makes sense that these should be all the same value. I'm gonna check it by scrolling on down. All right, this Hilton one is also false. I'm gonna go check on my other data set. Hilton also false. But once I get to this Macy's one, it should be true. So if I go over to my here, keep on scrolling, I get to my Macy's one and I see that it's changed to true. All right, awesome. This is a great case because if I do a quick scroll all the way down, I can see I'm getting either a true or false for every single value. I'm not running into any of those errors that I got before. So I actually don't really need an if error in this situation. But that doesn't mean I can't add another nested formula or an additional formula if I want to. So for example, I could do something like this. I could add a if thing here if I wanted the text to be a little bit more descriptive than just true or false. So I could say if this thing is true, then say some nice message like personal endorsement is required. All right. So I can look at what it's doing with my if formula. We talked about this one very briefly last week. If is going to take some sort of logical test, so something that's true or false. You can give it something to spit out if this first thing is true, and you can optionally give it another thing to spit out if that thing is false. I can tell it's optional because of my little help text, it's surrounded in these brackets. Anytime it gives me brackets, that's an optional thing. So that means I could just do an if with this one argument, my first test. I don't actually have to give it these three. In this case, I'm going to say, if that first thing is true, say personal endorsement required. And then if it's false, I'm going to say no PE required. Okay. Great, and so you can see that this, all it's doing, this formula is just checking in cell F2. If that's true, print this message, and otherwise print the second message I gave it, which is no PE required. I could paste that all the way down. And if I scroll down to just visually check, when this column switches to true, this column with my if switches to my other formula. Yeah, question in the front.
Yes, can you go back to the last one once you're done with this?
Oh, sure.
I see it, okay.
Up here?
Yeah, yeah, for personal endorsement.
Any questions about what we just did with our personal endorsement column?
Yes, how did y'all get false? I'm sorry. I
Yeah.
was stuck on the last one before that.
Okay, that's okay. All right, how do we get false? So basically what we want to do for this one is go over to our campaigns tab and say, all right, so this is the tab that tells us for each campaign whether or not personal endorsement is required. So all we're doing here is we're doing a VLOOKUP for each campaign, and we're grabbing that second column from our campaigns tab, which is that true or false. Now, this one's a little bit notable because for this one, the reference, so in this case, if I look at my formula, my B2, that's not grabbing any sort of ID, that's grabbing this thing, which is like a campaign name, right? This is a chunk of text. This is a bit of a riskier move on our part as far as formulas go, because names like this could very easily be mistyped or misspelled, right? Somebody might make the second D capitalized. Somebody might leave out the dash if they're typed. So depending on your data source, this like may or may not be a good practice. It would probably be better. You can see we have campaign IDs here. So campaign ID, add campaign name is already in here, but we see that our campaigns tab is missing that ID column. Another option for us would be sort of a data cleanup step. We could add a column here, just look with our eyeballs at what the IDs for these 6 campaigns are, and then match on the ID. That's something we would do if we had concerns about people mistyping the name of the campaign. So just kind of depends if you're exporting your data from some sort of system or if it's some sort of like auto-generated ID, those are usually very safe. If the ID is something like someone's email address or someone's say student ID number, those are like pretty safe. If the ID is like first name, you know, your friend might type in their nickname or not. So that can be not as great of a data to use. So it just kind of depends on your data source.
Thank you so much.
Sure. Any other questions about VLOOKUP or kind of some of these other formulas or if error, any of our testing? Yeah.
Sorry, could you
Please come here and look at the. Oh, sure. Yeah. All right, what you got? Okay, great, because in this column, we already did an if error. So this is already doing this column. So it's not giving you an error, it's just giving you text. So it's just copying that out. So that second column, yeah, if you had taken your if error out of that one, yeah. It's only gonna catch the error if it's doing that like pound NA thing. It's not gonna catch, if you already replaced the error with other text, it's no longer gonna read it as an error in the same way. Yes. Question right here?
Good exact same, but it's not.
Okay, so you'll notice here, if you click down to some other cell, yep, and then you look right here in your number format menu, it's general, but when you click into this one, switches to text. Your number format somehow got changed to text. If you switch it back to general, and then click in your formula and hit enter again, like, yeah, go edit and hit enter, that'll get it.
Oh,
Yeah, so if your formula shows that, like, if you type in your like equals, VLOOKUP, whatever, and you hit enter, and you just see the text equals VLOOKUP, whatever you typed in, that means it's reading in your number format menu as text. So you always want for it to evaluate properly as a formula, it should be general up here. You should change it to general, click in your formula and hit enter, and that'll fix that particular issue. All right. Okay, so we just talked about VLOOKUP. Next, we're going to talk about XLOOKUP. XLOOKUP is sort of the next generation of VLOOKUP. They can both be useful. I think it's useful to know both. I suspect you'll find yourself using XLOOKUP a little more often, but it just kind of depends. So here's the main difference. What VLOOKUP is doing, right, is we talked about this assumption that VLOOKUP is looking in that first column for an ID to match, and then it's counting how many columns to the right. XLOOKUP is saying, we don't necessarily need to look to the right. We could look to the left. We can get crazy in here, okay? So XLOOKUP is essentially a slightly more flexible version of VLOOKUP. You could imagine, let's say in our shows data tab, let's say show ID wasn't the first column, it was like over here somewhere on the right, but I wanted to get the podcast title, which is to the left of my ID column. I actually can't do that with VLOOKUP, which is really annoying. I would have to like paste my IDs back over here so that they were further to the left of any column I wanted to look up. That's annoying. So what XLOOKUP is doing is essentially making it a little bit more flexible, okay? You can also bring in multiple columns at once. You can handle errors without doing the separate if error thing that I just taught you. So it's a slightly more complex formula, but it can do a lot more. Okay, so we're gonna go through how that works. Okay, so XLOOKUP it's accomplishing, the main thing you should know is it's accomplishing the same thing that we just did with a different formula. This is the cool thing about Excel. There's a lot of cases where there's like a few different ways to accomplish the same thing. Okay, so XLOOKUP is very similar to VLOOKUP. It's going to take a lookup value. That's that thing we're searching for, like our show ID. It's going to take a lookup array. It's going to say what specific column should I go search for that value. It's going to take a return array. So instead of counting over to remember if column E is the 5th column, you could just select column E. You could just give it that column and you don't actually have to do the counting, the annoying number thing we just had to do. All right, you can optionally, there's 2 more arguments here. Optionally, I can give it a little message. So when a valid match is not found, return this text. All right, so it's going to give, so it's essentially building in this if error function that lots of people use in conjunction with VLOOKUP, and it's going to let you build that right in, nice and easy. And then it's going to get a little bit more involved with the match mode. So this is that true false thing that VLOOKUP had. This has a much better default. The default for this is exact match, which I think it should be. So I usually don't include this because I like the default. The default is match exactly. That's what I want. If for some reason you want to do a fuzzy match, there's a few other options. Those aren't like super complex. Okay, so everything we just did with VLOOKUP, we can also do with XLOOKUP with just kind of a slightly different setup. So let's walk through that. Okay, so basically what we're going to do is we're going to rewrite one of the VLOOKUPs that we just wrote using XLOOKUP. So you can see how to use this other formula to accomplish this very similar thing. Okay, the reason that we're doing this is so you can get a feel for what different formulas do, so you can get some kind of reps in writing formulas, and you can see there's slightly different use cases for these 2 things. Okay, so I'm going to go back to one of the VLOOKUPs we wrote before. Maybe I'll go back to my upload date one that we did first. And I'm going to label this column XLOOKUP version. Even if you're just mucking around, I would encourage you to give your columns names so that you know what each one is doing. All right, so in my XLOOKUP column, my desired result is the same result that I have in my column H, which I wrote with VLOOKUP. We're just going to try to accomplish it with XLOOKUP. All right, so I'm going to do very similar to what I did before. I'm going to do equals, do XLOOKUP. If you type in XLOOKUP and you don't get any suggested pop-up, that might mean you're on an older version of Excel, so go double check and make sure your Excel version is recent. Hopefully it is for everyone. Okay, and then we got our little pop-up with our arguments. So we're going to give it our lookup value. We're going to give it the column to go look for that value in, and then we're going to give it the column where that has the result that we want. Okay, so this is similar, but we don't have to find the column number basically. All right, so what I was going to do here was I was looking for my show ID in my episodes table. That's what we were doing before. This is our exercise to find our upload date. So same first argument. I still want it to give my the show ID, which is in cell A2, as my first argument. That's the thing I'm going to look up in my other table. comma, lookup array. All right, this is where it gets a little different. So now I'm going to go to my shows or my episodes tab here, and I'm going to say, I want you to go look in column B for the show ID. So I just selected this header B right here at the top that selects that whole column. I want you to go look in that whole column for this one. Okay. And then the value that I want you to return is in whatever other column you select here. So let's say I want to grab my upload date. Let's pop up for a second. All right, so I'm going to say go look for the show ID in column C or in column B. And then if you find it, give me the value that's in column C. Okay, so this is similar to what we did before. I'm just not doing the number thing. All right, and then if it's not found, I'm going to type in a little message, not found. That's optional. I could leave that out if I wanted to. Okay, I hit enter. All right. Hoping to get my same result. I got this weird number. What do I do when I get a weird number? I reformat. Okay, so you go to your number format menu up here. We'll change this back to date. Beautiful. Okay, I got my 2/6. All right, and then I'm going to paste this all the way down. So again, I'm going to hover on the corner and double click. And that's going to get me spinning wheel for a second. Okay, it says still working on it. All right, but if I paste that all the way down, I'm expecting to get the same thing I got in column H. Okay. Being a little slow on me. Did anybody get that to work, or anybody run into an error with XLOOKUP?
Yes.
Yeah.
Error. It keeps saying there's a problem.
Okay.
You type equal 1 + 1 cell shows 2.
Right. Okay, so let's
Am I
click
missing the?
out of this and go look at your formula. Okay, so you have XLOOKUP A2, comma, episodes B to B,
Should there be space?
episodes C to C, not found. You have some other stuff at the end here.
Yeah, because it would. I thought I needed it. Like it
Ah,
wouldn't let me.
Yeah,
not
so
do
if
it
it's in the
without it.
if it's in the brackets, you don't, it's optional. You don't need it. So you should be able to hit enter just from here. Yep, you got it. Okay. All right. Why don't we, it looks like you have an extra, so you have episodes B to B, episodes C to C, and then you have shows exclamation point. with a comma in
Oh.
there. Let's try that. Beautiful.
Okay, perfect. Thank you so much.
Problem.
Is this a date? It's a date.
Sheet view.
Whew.
That was a lot. Let's try this. Of course, it's like frozen right now. All right, did anyone get theirs to work? Get their XLOOKUP to work? Nod, that's it. Okay, great. All right, browser versions being a little frustrating with me. Okay, but any of those VLOOKUP formulas that we just wrote, you should be able to write with XLOOKUP. Okay, it's actually maybe even a little simpler because you can just, you're selecting your columns. Okay. So let's go do that one more time with any one of the formulas that you wrote before. So let's say I'm going to go back to here. I'm going to go over to my campaign participations tab, rewrite one of these formulas that we just did, show title or personal endorsement. We did these two with VLOOKUP. Do one of those again, but with XLOOKUP. Okay, just one more time, one more sort of like rep to get to practice. All right, make sure you get the same result. So show title or personal endorsement, either one, both if you're feeling ambitious. Rewrite them with XLOOKUP and make sure you get the same result. Okay. Question.
Name usually means it's like it can't find a formula with that name, so it may be your version. If you could check in like your Excel like settings or like wherever you downloaded it from. I don't know. Should.
You think it's older?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, if you go Excel there. Sorry, yeah, this one and then the 2017. Yeah, so this is from
Oh.
pre XLOOKUP days. You should have Office 365 though, as part of like this online thing that I'm using. I think all the students should have access to, so you
Yeah,
can
yeah.
try it out there. It also works in Google Sheets. This stuff, like everything we talked about last week, all works in Google Sheets. Yeah, questions? How did I get which one? Column G, yes, good question. This was our if formula. So this is just looking at column F, and it's saying if this first thing is, if this first thing is true, spit out this text, and otherwise spit out this second piece of text. So this is sort of an alternative to that if error that I was using, because these aren't errors. This is just like text that is a little not human friendly. So I'm just kind of reformatting that text. The other reason I did this is because you could nest this together with your VLOOKUP. So here I did it where I'm saying if F2 and then my two options, I could have nested my whole VLOOKUP into this F2 space as a nested formula. So we could do that with our XLOOKUP, for example. So I'm going to take my whole if thing right here. I'm going to paste that in. But instead of F2, I'm going to put my whole XLOOKUP as this first argument. Okay, so I'm going to say if XLOOKUP. All right, and then I'm going to do my whole formula in here. Okay, so I want to go look up which value. I want to go look up the campaign title. So this thing that's in B2. I want to go look up in my campaigns tab in column A. And then I want to return the thing that's in my campaigns tab in column B. So I'm going to put that as my second thing. And then I'm going to hit enter. I guess I could put a little message if there's an error. Okay. All right. And then if I paste this all the way down, I call this XLOOKUP nested. I'm going to call this one if formula. Okay. So here I did VLOOKUP, and then I did an if formula to add this nice text. Here I did my if formula nested with XLOOKUP, which is accomplishing the same thing as my VLOOKUP did. See that? Question?
Do you need that if the XLOOKUP already comes with the if option, the error
The
option?
error thing? Yep, good question. Let's get rid of this if thing. For the purposes of this little demo, I'm gonna get rid of my if. So this is just a regular old XLOOKUP, no if statement. All right, give me this. Let me paste that all the way down. Hover right here, double click. All right, great. So in this case, right, I wasn't getting any errors. So this is giving me the same thing as my column F was giving me, which is great. I'm not seeing any of this error message because there are no errors. Every campaign that's in this column exists in my campaigns tab, so there's no not found errors. The reason I would do the if in this case is if I wanted to make this a little more user friendly for whoever I'm sending this to. Like, let's say I'm about to email all these podcasts and tell them, hey, you got included in this campaign. Here's some information about it. Here's the CPM, and here's whether personal endorsement's required. In that email to them, it might be nicer to have a little description versus just like true or false. That would be, it's just like a text formatting thing. Yeah, the if error is only going to pop up if the like formula itself actually didn't find anything. That's when you're going to use if error.
Okay. And then for this one, I was doing the show title one, and it keeps trying to download a theme. Oh, so wait, when you do A/B for campaigns, that's just highlighting the whole data set?
Yeah, so when I'm grabbing the whole, so yeah, so for XLOOKUP, what you're giving it is a column to go look in and a column to grab a result from. So it's fine to grab the whole column, which you can just do by clicking the column header. That's just easier. You could also put here A1 to A500 or whatever. I think A to A is a little cleaner, a little easier. And it has the added bonus because it's just looking at the entire column. You don't have to add your dollar signs. You don't have to do your absolute cell reference because A is just always going to grab the whole column no matter where it is.
Right, but I guess I'm losing sight of the second one. What does the first one mean in relation to the second one? So like campaign A, and then campaigns B.
Great, okay, yep, so this is our little, pop open my little formula thing. Perfect, okay, so before we gave it a grid, in VLOOKUP,
Yeah.
we give it a grid and then a number column.
Exactly.
Here, instead, we're just giving it column to go look up the ID, column to give us the result from. Those are the two columns that we're giving it.
Okay,
So that second column, that B to B, is just that column we want the results from.
exactly.
In this case, our campaigns data set is extremely simple. It only has two columns. So I said, go look in column A and give me the thing in column B. You can imagine if you had a zillion columns over to the right, you could just go select one and you don't have to count that it's the 105th column over. And take
Got it. So it's the column that we want the reference from, and then a column we want the result from.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yep.
So if I'm doing show title, the column I want the reference from is, which one is this? A, B, C, D, E, E. Okay, I have that. And then the column I want the reference from, is that not also E?
Oh, I see what you're saying. Okay, so let's go through our arguments one more time. So our first argument here is our value. So our value is this first thing. In this one, it was C2. But in this, so the first thing you give it is that one value you want to look up. All right, so in this case, I want to say, go look for this one show ID, which is in cell C2. And then go look in my shows table over here. You'll see it's show, so this is my VLOOKUP, right? Was go look at my shows table from columns A to E. So if I go to my shows, if I'm doing this for XLOOKUP, my first argument's the same. For VLOOKUP and XLOOKUP, your first argument, this C2, is going to be the same, because in either case, you want to tell it which show ID should I go look for out in the world. So I'm going to say C2. But then when I go to my shows, for my subsequent arguments here, right here, I gave it the grid of all this data in shows in multiple columns and then a number. For these two arguments in XLOOKUP, I would still go to shows, but the first argument would be this column to go look for the ID. And my second column would be the column that contains my title, column E.
Gotcha.
And the good news is you don't have to memorize any of this stuff, because when you're writing a formula, you get this little handy dandy pop-up, or I think on Mac, it sometimes shows up on the right-hand side on the toolbar. You'll get this little pop-up with these little reminders of what's what. So I use these formulas pretty often, but sometimes I have to remember like what order these are in or whatever. You just look at the little pop-up. Okay, question back here.
The last section, like not found or arrow.
Yeah, okay, great. Or error. This thing right here?
Oh yeah, because like if we're putting in like the first one is the thing we want to look for, and the second one is a section of we're looking for, and the third one should be like false or true, right? I mean, first false, like the false or true means like personal
Endorsement,
endorsement.
yep.
But why we put another?
Because maybe we don't, in this case, we can like, our data sets are both pretty short. We can look and see, oh, all the campaigns are in both tabs. We're all good. But you could imagine if our second campaign tab was missing one of those rows, we might get an error. So let's do a demo of that.
It's the
So yeah, so here, right, so we're getting personal endorsement equals false. In this one for our XLOOKUP, right, we said if there's an error, give us this little error thing, but like, why did we do that if we're just gonna get a true or false? So let's say our campaigns tab was missing this DoorDash column. I'm just gonna delete it for the purposes of this. And I come back over here and my column has changed. Now it's giving me an error because when it went and looked up this value in my other tab, it didn't exist.
oh, so it's the same function as if arrow.
Exactly. It's just doing it in that same step, so you don't have to do it your second in there. Yeah. All right, I'm gonna put this back in case anyone comes to this sheet later. Yeah.
If anyone renames the tabs.
Yeah.
Does that mess with the using the lookups?
Great question. Let's run an experiment. I'm gonna rename this tab. Campaigns are fun. Go back over and look at my formulas, and it auto updated. Yeah, so it'll often do that, but yeah, it's probably a good idea to double check. These tabs also, I believe they can't have spaces in the names. Yeah. Question.
So in what occasions you need to use an XLOOKUP instead of VLOOKUP.
VLOOKUP. Yeah, in a lot of cases, they're the same. So in a lot of cases, you can use either. One case where you can't use VLOOKUP is if the data that you want to spit back as the result is on the left-hand side of the data that you want to look up. So here, right, our ID is on the left-hand side and the information we want is on the right. Great. If it were switched, VLOOKUP would work, which is just like an annoying thing. Like when I learned Excel and there wasn't XLOOKUP, I would spend a lot of time like pasting this column back over to the left first so that I could use it in my formula. That's annoying. No one wants to do that. You can do that in XLOOKUP. So in most cases, up to you. XLOOKUP's a little more flexible. So if you're like, which one should I try to remember more? Probably XLOOKUP, but you can use either.
Yes, and then a follow-up to that, is there no way like you could have, so the only thing that would have, that's connecting all of these is the ID number, right?
Mhm.
Okay, so if that wasn't, like you said, if it wasn't in the first column using only VLOOKUP, you would have to
Yep.
change, okay.
Exactly.
Whew, this is a lot of work. People do this every day.
I was doing exactly this at my job today, in fact. All right. Any other questions about VLOOKUP or XLOOKUP? Okay. All right, we got a couple more things in here for today. So we talked a little bit about this last week, but we're going to dive a little bit deeper into this. So XLOOKUP and VLOOKUP are what I would call like a row-based formula, meaning they're going to give you an answer or a result for each row, right? If you do VLOOKUP, you paste it all the way down, you're getting a result for each row based on something that's going on in that row. So as that I say that to differentiate from cumulative formulas, these are the sort of summary formulas we were talking about last time. This is where you might do your sum or your average, your total, your any sort of cumulative measure like that. There's sort of a couple more nuances than we talked about last week that I want to get into. So we talked about absolute cell references. You can use them to your advantage when you're doing any sort of cumulative formula. So for example, if I show you, this is our little sample data set before, I have my order number, I have the item that I ordered, we did our VLOOKUP or XLOOKUP to get our item price earlier, right? That was our example. Let's say I want to know throughout the day, I have like a running ticker of how much money I sold my first cappuccino, I made $6.50. After I sold my second cappuccino, I made $13. I sold a matcha, now I'm up to $19, right? Cumulative is something that you might want to be keeping track of as you go down a list. So you can obviously get your total revenue for the day by just doing a sum at the bottom, right? I could come down to my item price thing and I could do equals sum of this whole range, get my total for the day. But if I want cumulative, I can do a fun little trick with the absolute cell references that we learned about before. So I can use my $ and just once to sort of glue in place this top row. So I want to say, no matter what row we're on, always start at F2 and then add everything up above that. Okay, so like, as an example, let's go into here. I'm going to go into my shows. And next to my downloads, I'm going to add a column. All right, so these are monthly downloads. So let's say I want to know cumulative, sort of thinking, let's say I want to do some sort of cumulative over time, how many downloads am I getting from you? Like I had one show, there's this many downloads. I had the second show, there's now that many downloads. I want to do that sort of cumulative function. So here's how I would do that. For my first one, I would just say, boom, that's my first value. For my second one, this is where I would start my formula. So this is where I would do my sum. So we talked about this before. And remember, sum can take two different things. It can take either a bunch of separate values. So you can select a cell and do a comma, select another cell and select a comma. You can do that a bunch of times. Or you can do a cell with a colon in between. And then that'll give you the whole range. Okay, so in this case, or let's see, I guess this will be easier to do on my third row. Maybe I'll just start on the third row for the purposes of this demo. Okay, so I'm going to do my sum. And I'm going to say start up here, then go to, so start at G2, add G3, and add this cell to that to get my cumulative number. All right, so I've got, I should have done this the second row, but okay. All right, just for the purpose of what we're doing here. Okay, so just looking at this third row, I'm getting a cumulative number because I'm adding together these two above it and then this new one from this row. Okay, now, same thing as I did before. If I paste this formula down, so let's do this. I'm gonna copy and just paste it one row. Now it's all it's gonna do based on this copy paste, it's sort of trying to be smart, is it's just gonna add columns 3 and 4, or rows 3 and 4 rather, plus this new number F5. So the F5 is correct, right? That's when we want to move on down with our formula, but we actually want it to start at G2 every time. We don't want that place it's starting to sort of slide down as we go. So this is a case where I can insert my $sign, but strategically, I'm only going to put in $1 sign, right? Because I want these other two numbers to kind of come down with me as I copy my formula down, but I always want it to start from the top, okay? So I'm going to copy that formula, I'm going to paste it here, and we'll see that once I do that, even though I pasted it down, right, it's moved, G3 has moved down to G4, F4 has moved down to F5, right? But because of my $sign, the G2 stays glued in place. So what this is going to do is as I paste this all the way down, this is going to give me sort of like a running total, cumulative total from the top, because I've used my little cell reference very strategically to just glue the top in place and have the rest come down. That makes sense? So we used our references before so that we could lock in place a whole block of cells, but you can use it either for rows or columns. The most common way you'll use this is for something cumulative like this. If you just want to lock in your starting point. Okay, something else to know about cell references. This is also a common place for errors. If you're starting to work with some formulas and you're noticing that your numbers aren't right, or you've like copy pasted a formula and your numbers are looking a little odd, one of the main places you might want to look to troubleshoot is if you meant to have an absolute cell reference, if you were sort of meaning for it to glue itself and keep referencing the same cell, but you didn't add your $sign. That's a very common error that I see if people are learning to write formulas. That's something to look for. All right. Okay, so we got one last exercise, which is to do this. So we got a few kind of putting together everything that we talked about today. So we're going to write one more VLOOKUP or XLOOKUP on your campaign participation tab. Go grab your show's monthly downloads number. Okay, so we already did this for the show title. This is almost exactly the same formula. You could even just rewrite that column if you want and go grab your monthly downloads number instead of your show title. Okay. Then you're going to add a column for revenue, which is going to be one of those row-based formulas that we talked about. This is a very simple one using our CPM. So once you have your monthly downloads, so we're basically adding our monthly downloads to our campaign participation tab, okay, which has our CPM. This is our price. So we're going to add a VLOOKUP column to get the monthly downloads for each show or XLOOKUP. Then you're going to add another column that's just doing some very simple math, which is converting the CPM and downloads to our total revenue. So CPM is our revenue per 1,000 downloads. So the formula for that is just CPM times downloads divided by 1,000. Okay, and then very last thing, you're gonna do that last piece I just talked about, which is add a cumulative revenue column down the right-hand side, which will add from the top all the revenue that we've earned up to that row. All right. This is sort of our last exercise to put all this stuff together. So VLOOKUP or XLOOKUP, simple row-based math formula that you'll copy all the way down. And then you're going to add a cumulative revenue formula on the right that's doing this piece that we just talked about here, where we're doing a sum, but we're sort of gluing our start point to the top. Okay. So we got about 10 minutes left. I'm going to give you all a few minutes to work on this. If you're stuck, give me a wave and I will come help.
Can we skip back to the assignment?
Yes, back to the slide. Yes, sorry. Wrong one up. Okay, there you go. Yeah. Your mind.
Good question.
To answer that question, I would say go ahead and copy this formula down here.
You got classic.
Yes.
Great, okay, so now let's go look at it in the cell. So from this cell, it's doing G2 to G3 plus F4. So when I pasted it in, it's doing G2 to G4 and F5. All right, so it's moving those two numbers down because it's gonna automatically do that when we paste, but we don't want it to forget about this first show just because we moved down a row, right? We want it to keep expanding. So what this $sign is doing is it's gonna say, keep our start point up here, but leaving the $sign off these other ones means that those will keep moving down. So it'll leave this here, but as you paste going down, you'll still capture everything. Yeah, good question.
Okay, I have a question. Things that I really don't have any brains left to go show for this because the cinema just actually in a blank and I really don't know how to do by using the wave count to sell to pro.
Okay, great. So on your campaign participation tab, yeah, so we already added the show title, right? So essentially all you need to do is exactly what, if you look at the formula you did for this one, for your show title. Yeah, all right, so here we did, right, we went to our shows tab, we said, go grab the ID from column A, grab the title from column E. So all I want you to grab from that tab is the monthly downloads number instead of the title. Okay, so you could just choose to modify this formula and instead of, you can leave it, but it's, yeah, sure. But instead of column E, you're gonna hit escape if you, yeah. Yeah, okay. Great, but instead of column E, which column has the monthly downloads in your show tab?
Okay, so I guess.
Column F, yeah. All right. So a little funky. Yep, perfect. Now it looks like it got shows exclamation point twice. You might just want to like that out because it gets a little weird. All right, and go ahead and hit enter. Boom. All right, so there's your, yep, that's your first step. Very good. Yeah.
So if you like added them together, it's like.
Oh, I see what you're saying. Yeah, I should have done that in the first column. So what I should have done is this one plus that one. Yeah,
So
correct.
the way I do it is just
Yeah.
like add up.
Yes.
Like. I don't like from that.
Yeah.
Like, if that.
That's right. What you did is right and what I did is wrong. Okay. I'm gonna explain the error that I just made real quick. Okay. I was sort of doing two things at once, which I shouldn't have been doing. So the way I did cumulative probably didn't make a lot of sense. Thank you for finding that out. What was your name? Shuni? Okay. All right. So what I should have done for the cumulative is I should, which is this column here, cumulative downloads. I was essentially double counting. What I should have been doing is my sum should have been F2, F4 here, or F2 to F3 rather. F2, this is in column. Yeah, okay. So what I should have been doing here is starting from F2, adding up to F2. I was making a cumulative column and then I was adding the cumulative column to itself. So very good catch on my math. Perfect. So now these numbers are a little bit more normal. So yeah, my second one's not cumulative because this is where I should have done this before. All right, so let's paste this up here. Beautiful. Okay. Great. So what I was doing is I was using my cumulative column to refer to itself. That was not very smart of me. So what I should be doing, my first row, right, is just my original value. My second row is saying, go grab F2 and F3. My third row is saying, start from F2 and come down to the third row, etc. So that's my error. Very good catch. All right.
I don't know what happened there, I'm not gonna lie, but that's okay.
That's all good. If you didn't get there yet, it's all good. Okay, how do we do on getting our monthly downloads number using VLOOKUP or XLOOKUP? Got that working? All right, what you got?
So X look.
XLOOKUp.
So I first select campaign participation A2.
All right, very good.
And
A2.
A2.
And then show.
All right.
A2, like the A,
A to A. Great.
right, and F.
And then column F. All right, beautiful. Okay. So I got a number here. Now, something quick to check. You said your first cell was A2? Yeah. Okay, so this is well, error that can be a little hard to catch. So what's an A2 is our campaign ID. And what's in our column on our shows tab is our show ID. It's also called ID, but it's our show. So you'll notice if I come in here for this one, if I paste my formula down, it's going to get the same number for all of these.
So it's show ID.
Yeah, perfect.
One is C2.
Very good. Should be C2. Awesome. Okay, yep. And once I do that, I can paste that all the way down. Lovely. And that's grabbing for each show. Perfect. All right. That's our first part. We could have done it with VLOOKUP as well, but we did it with XLOOKUP. All right. What about our row-based formula? Did anyone get that working? You don't have anything for their row-based formula? Okay, sure. You got it.
I don't know if but it's equals sum.
Sum?
Campaign participation with D2, so it's CPM,
Right?
times open bracket. Campaign participation I2, so we're not be down low, it's what mine were.
Okay.
Divided by 100, 2 close brackets.
Very good. CPM is divided by 1,000, so I'm just gonna make it 1,000, but very good. Perfect. Okay, cool. That's totally good. In this case, this formula would work without, I don't think you need your sum here because we're just based on a row, but yes, exactly, that's right. So CPM, this is just some simple math. CPM times our downloads divided by 100 gets us our revenue. All right, very good. All right, adding our cumulative revenue column. Anyone get to this part? If you did, you get extra bonus points because I didn't even explain it correctly the first time. Okay, so label my columns, we have downloads, we have revenue. All right, and now I'm going to do my cumulative revenue. Okay, cumulative revenue. All right, so my first cell is just my first bit of revenue, and I'm going to just do a nice little reformat my number to currency. So I got my nice little dollar signs, and it's all rounded to 2 decimal places. Okay. Then I'm going to come in here, and I'm going to say sum of my original column, my J2, to my current row, J3. But I gotta do my pivotal part because I want this to be cumulative and I always want it to start from J2. I'm gonna come in here and add my dollar sign, my absolute cell reference right here. Then I'm gonna paste this guy all the way down. And that's gonna add, so to this row, it's just adding about 5,000 to my 9,000, comes out to about 15,000. That seems right, my math checks out. Thank you for the math assist. Got that all working. Okay, so we combined a lot of stuff in there today. Lots going on. Should give you an example of the types of things you can do with formulas. You can always search your formula builder for a formula that might do what you want. You can always try ChatGPT or Claude or one of these assistants, sort of explain what you want to do and see what formula it gives you. That can at least give you a starting point or a first draft. Okay. Next week, what we're going to do in this workshop is we're going to talk about charts and tables. You might have heard of pivot tables, or you might have used those a little bit. We'll talk about those next week. Those are a very good quick analysis tool. And in the last session, we'll put this all together and make sort of a data dashboard using all the tools that we talked about throughout all these sessions. These are some tools I mentioned last time. If you want to keep learning about Excel, these are a few sources that I like. We're right at 6 o'clock. Session is over. I will hang out for a few more minutes if anyone has any last questions. Thank you. Thank you all so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks so much.